Welcome back. I am Erica with Revival Threadworks, and today we're going to be making a really fast dog leash. And we're going to use a fat quarter today. Now, if you don't have a fat quarter that you want to use, or you don't like using fat quarters, you can just use 2 pieces of fabric that are width of fabric. So basically there'll just be, these 2 pieces already joined together, and they'll need to be 2 3/4 inches wide. So right here, I've cut 4 strips for my fat quarter. I squared it all up before I cut my strips and everything, but like I said, they're 2 3/4 inches wide, and these are about 21 inches long. Like I said, they came from a fat quarter. And you'll see me use a whole lot of fat quarters in my projects, and that's because I absolutely adore fat quarters. So I buy them in their collections, and I just love them, and I love to find ways to use my fat quarters. So again, if you don't like fat quarters, please use your regular yardage, but this is just a way for me to make a quick and fun little project for all of us and use up some of my fat quarters. So I chose black, or a fabric that has mostly black in it, because this is a dog leash and I know that it's going to get a little dirty. So I would advise that you choose a fabric that's pretty dark. So you're going to need approximately, like I said, I've got 4 strips here, about 21 inches. So I've got about 84 inches. We're going to join these together. So if you're using yardage, you're going to use 2 width of fabric by 2 3/4 inch wide. You're going to need some pins. You're going to need some strapping. This is seatbelt strapping, and it doesn't really matter the color as long as your fabric is dark enough. Mine's going to cover it, so it doesn't matter that this is pink. My dog is a male, so that's why I chose black, but again, this is going to get all covered up. You need some scissors. You're going to need a heavy-duty clasp. I don't know if these are called lobster claw clasps or not. And this, when I was coming up with this project, I assumed that this was a 1-inch opening here. And to be honest with you, because it's rounded, the 1 inch fits in here, but not quite as nicely as I wanted it to. So I would make sure that whatever clasp you're using has a straight bottom or can accommodate the wider 1 inch. You're also going to need something to turn a tube. So I use a chopstick and a boba straw. You can use a tube turner or whatever it is you want. You're going to need a little marking ruler, a little marking pen or chalk pencil, something like that. And then because we're doing strapping, I like to use my number 10 Bernina edge stitch foot. And another thing that of course I forgot to pull out is a bodkin. So you're going to want to have a bodkin so that you can pull this through once you make your fabric tube. Speaking of fabric tubes, that is the very first thing that we're going to do. Like I said, this is a very quick project. I don't like to do full tutorials all the time just because, watching a full hour tends to be a bit much sometimes. So that's why I chose this quick little project for you. So that way we can do a nice little project with, like I said, our fat quarters, but yet not spend all day watching a video. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to attach our strips together. Now you'll notice that I'm slightly inside here and slightly over up there. The reason why I do this sometimes is because I want to be able to clearly see that little joint right there, because sometimes I miss it and I don't always get it exactly the way that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I can see it really carefully here, and we're just going to pin those 2 pieces together. And I am going to go ahead and make a mark just so that, again, I make sure that I'm right on. So basically you're going to put your ruler right between that junction. Okay, so you've got, I'm going to pull it up a little bit closer to the camera here in just a second. I'm sure most of you have probably done this before, making a long tube, but if you haven't, I want to show you. So the junction that I'm talking about is where these 2 make a 90-degree angle. So right here. Okay, right here, you want to sew from that juncture to that one. So the line that I drew is literally from that intersection to that intersection. Okay, now we're going to do this with all 4 of our pieces, or if you only have 2 pieces, you'll do it with both of your pieces. And then we're going to take these over to the machine and we're going to sew them up real quick. And then we're going to trim the excess off. So when we sew, we'll just cut a 1/4 inch seam line there. We're going to open these up, and I'm going to come back here and show you a little trick that I like to use. So next thing we're going to do is sew these together. Okay, so now we are ready to sew our strips together, and we're just going to put the strips underneath the needle, and we're just going to follow that line that we made. And again, hopefully you can see it a little bit better here, but this little juncture right here, this 90-degree angle, we're looking to have the line that we sew be right between that all the way down to right between there. So it just makes a nice little angle for us, and then when we fold it over, we'll have a nice clean looking strip. So just going to sew this. And then obviously we're just going to throw the next couple ones on there. And then we will move back over to the table and I'll show you a trick to get these to lay flat. Okay, now that we've gotten the entire strip sewn together, just like this, and we took our little triangle pieces, trimmed them off by about 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch. Here's the little trick that I wanted to show you. So when you're threading your strapping through, this part is on the inside. So the strap, as it's going through the tube, can get hung up on these little bits of fabric here. So here's a little trick to show you that will help save you a little bit of frustration. So take a little bit of fabric glue, very, very little, and just kind of run it just a little tiny bit right up underneath that fabric there. Push your fabric over the glue. Do the same thing on the other side. And then you want to take your iron and just gently iron over that. Okay, that sets your glue, helps it, you know, get all dried and everything. And now, actually we'll do it both sides, but now it's completely flat. So when your strip goes through there, it's not going to catch on that fabric. Okay, so just do that with all 3 of your little edges here. And then when we go back to the machine, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sew a tube. So from one end to the other, we are just going to sew. We're just going to sew right sides together. So 1/4 of an inch seam along here. We are not going to iron this, because if we iron this, we're going to leave a crease. We do not want a crease. Okay, so you're just going to go to your machine, right sides together this long ways, and sew 1/4 of an inch all the way down here. And then we'll come back here, turn the tube, and I'll show you what's next. Now that we're back at the machine, we are literally just going to sew all the way down this long strip. So we've put our right sides together, starting at one end, and we are just going to sew a nice 1/4 inch all the way down. Okay, now we're back and we've gotten the whole strip sewn together. And the next thing you want to do, this is not 100% necessary, but it can be a little bit helpful when you're dealing with a strip that's this long, is you want to press your seam open, but be careful not to iron this here. So how you do it, I've already done most of it, by the way, off camera, but how you want to do it is lay it flat like this and then flip this over. And so just here, make sure you're not getting this part over here. So sew it flat like that. And then you're going to turn it over and then just kind of fold that over like that. Ooh, be careful not to burn yourself because that does hurt. And then just press like this. And what this does is just kind of helps keep your strap flat. So as you're getting your strap or your seatbelt strap in there, it can get a little bunched up. So this just kind of helps everything lay flat. So this is just what it looks like. So it just helps it stay a little bit flatter, just like that. So the next thing we're going to do is turn this whole thing inside out. So we're going to take our little tube turner, which again is a boba straw for me, and we're just going to shove that down there and leave, I don't know what, 2-3 inches there. And then we're going to take our chopstick or whatever, you know, tube turning tool you have, and we're going to shove that in there. And then we're just going to start turning this whole thing inside out. So just like this, it works super great, super easy, super fast, but you got to make sure that you don't let it bunch up at the end there, because then that can be a little bit of a mess. Okay, so just keep pulling it all the way through until you get the whole thing turned inside out. There we go. You know, like I said, keep working at it till the whole thing is inside out. Sorry, it's a little awkward to do on camera just because, you know, it's a little awkward to do on camera. But there we go. Okay, so now the whole tube is turned inside out. Get our chopstick out of there. We just gotta work it out. There we go. Okay, so now the next thing we're gonna do is get a bodkin or a safety pin, and we're gonna feed this strapping through. Now I measured this, and because we had 4 separate strips that were 21 inches and we joined them all together, we lost about 3 inches or so per join. So we have about 74 inches here. So as far as strapping that you're gonna need about 74 inches. Actually, you might need more like 72 inches just because we're gonna finish the ends of these. So like I said, just take your bodkin or your safety pin and start feeding this through. Now the further down you get in the strip, the harder it's going to be. So make sure you have something that's good and secure. Like I said, your bodkin or your safety pin, and you're going to pull this all the way through. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to top stitch on each side. So I will finish up getting this threaded through, and I'll meet you over at the machine and we'll do the top stitch. Okay, so now we're back at the machine, and I have put on my number 10 edge stitch foot. So if you do not have a Bernina, I'm not sure what number foot it is, but it should have some sort of little guide like this. This just goes right down the center where the needle goes, and then you move your needle over to the right or to the left, depending on where you're trying to sew, and this gives you a nice 1/8 of an inch top stitch. So I put that foot on. Now we've got our strap all the way through the tube that we made. So we want to make sure that the seam here is facing, you know, as evenly on one side as possible. You know, that way we're good as far as, you know, it not being all twisted or anything. So just do your best to try to make sure that it's all on one side. And then you're going to want to, actually, you know what, I think, hang on. You're going to want to leave about 1 inch. So I'm going to trim this up just a little bit here because I think I made it a little bit too long. So basically you want to have about 1 inch or 1/2 inch to 1 inch of fabric over the edge of your strapping here. So if you look down here, my strapping is about 1/2 inch to 1 inch below the edge of this fabric. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to take our finger and we're just going to tuck in the edges of this fabric into this little tube and just kind of cover up these ends, because we want to just sew a nice box to secure this whole thing rather than have exposed edges. And then we're just going to, I'm just using a little stiletto here to kind of push this in and make sure it's nice and neat and clean there. Hopefully we can get it good. So like I said, basically you're looking just to have a nice even little edge there. And then we're just going to take this and put it under the machine, and we're just going to sew all the way around the entire strap. Now when we get to the other end, we're going to do the exact same thing, and we're going to tuck the fabric into the tube so that the fabric is not exposed and there's no exposed edges. And you know what, I'm just going to tuck this just a little bit more so it's not that weird angle. But anyway, we're just going to go all the way around, all 4 sides. So side 1, 2, you know, up, and then 4. So we'll do that, and then I will meet you back at the table. Now we're back, and we have done a top stitch all the way down the whole length of the strapping, and that would be on the non-seamed, well actually the top stitch was on the seamed, the non-seamed side, but we tucked in our corners so that everything looks nice and neat. And now we're just going to make the handle, and then we're going to add on the hardware. So you want to make a mark, let's see, right about 11 inches. Now I have switched to a white chalk marker, and that's because the marking pen that I had before was dark and it's not going to show up on this pin. So we're going to go ahead and just make a mark that's about 11 inches. Let's see, right about here. So 11 inches that way. And then we're going to fold this over. And you know what, let me get a couple of clips. Of course, I forgot my clips as usual. But we're going to go ahead and grab a couple of clips, and we're going to clip this in place. And this right here is going to be your handle. So let's clip that. Now you're going towards, you're doing seam side to seam side. So make sure that the seam is on the inside of this here. And I want you to put your hand in here and just kind of make sure that this feels good. We're going to be sewing a 3/4 inch X box here. So just kind of make sure that your hand fits good in here. If you need to extend it a little bit, then just make your mark at 12 inches. But actually, before we clip that, I'm sorry. On the side that does not have a seam, you want to make a mark that's 0.75 inches from that seam line. So we're going to make a mark, let's see, right about here. And now we're just going to go ahead and go all the way like that. And then we're going to take our ruler and we're going to make an X. Okay. Now this X is what we're going to sew, and we're going to sew over it a couple of times to make sure that we're good and reinforced. So just like this, the 4th line is that seam line there. So you've got this line, and then of course we're going to sew right over what we did over there, but that's your X. And like I said, we're going to put it at the 11-inch mark. And now we're going to clip it and take it over to the machine, and we're going to sew an X. And I'm going to show you how to sew that X when we get over there. Now we're going to go to the other side, because we'll do all this at the same time at the machine. And we're going to mark about, let's see, I think I figured out about 4.5 inches. So make a mark at 4.5 inches, which is going to be right here. And then you're going to make sure that your seam side up. So your seam is facing up. Take your hardware and put it through. And you know what? And I forgot again. We need to make those same marks, I'm sorry, on the non-seamed side. So we need to do 3/4 inches from the edge of the seam, which is right here. Make our little X right there. And right there. And of course I got a little bit stuck there in my fabric. The fabric came out just slightly loose because normally when I make a really long strip like this, I don't like to have any, or I like to make it just a real scant 1/4 inch seam. That way it makes sure that it feeds through. So sometimes that means it's just slightly loose. Not loose, but not completely flat. So that's what you're seeing there. But anyway, now we're going to put our hardware. So we'll flip it back over to the seam side up and then slip the edge of the end of our strap there onto the hardware. And then we're going to find that line and clip it. And then we're going to do the same thing at the machine with this one. And we're going to sew that X box as well. Okay, now we're back at the machine and we're ready to sew our little X box here. So I've kept my edge stitch foot on here because I want to make sure that I'm following the exact same lines that I made when I did the top stitching. So I took one of the clips out just so that it isn't too bulky there. But we're going to go ahead and just sew the outer the outer box first. So just, you know, carefully sew where you sewed before. Take it through the machine, and I'm going to go ahead and clip this out, or clip this off and get it out of the way. I'm also going to take my little clip off just because I don't want it in the way. But again, we're just going to follow. Take your needle all the way to that line that you marked, and we're just going to keep turning it through. Now you'll have to lift up that little edge guide there just because it does tend to get in the way. And if you'll note here, the edge of my edge stitch foot is about 1/8 of an inch from that mark. That's what I want because my needle is all the way to this side. It's to the left. So that mark, or that guide, is not where my needle is. Okay. And now we're going to go down back to where we started from. Okay, and now we're going to sew those X's. Okay, so I've got to get everything turned around here. So now we'll lift up that little guide. And we're going to sew right along that line. Okay. Okay, and then now we're going to turn it this way again. And this is going to reinforce that stitch again. And we're going to follow it all the way across again. Okay, and now we're going to go down the other line, the other diagonal, to make the other part of the X. Now because this joint is going to take a whole lot of handling, just because obviously this is the handle, I'm going to go ahead and go over this entire thing one more time. And then when we're done with that, we're going to take the hardware side and we're going to do the exact same thing. When you get to the end that has the hardware on it, if it seems like you may be a little bit too close and not have enough room to get everything nice and flat because of your hardware, you can always pull this down a little bit because your markings are on this side. So it'll be fine if you go down a little bit. I think I'm going to be okay here, but if you need to do that, a little adjusting due to your hardware, then go ahead and feel free to do that because like I said, your X box is going to be marked on the top part. We are back, and just like that, we're done. So we have made a super simple, super satisfying, quick little sew here. This is the lobster claw clasp that actually attaches to the collar. Here's the handle part, and everything's been double reinforced. And it's just, again, one of these things that I call just a simple, satisfying sew. It's just a way to use up a little bit of your fat quarters, and obviously you don't even have to use fat quarters. And another thing I want to note is that if you have a smaller dog, now my dog happens to be about 80 pounds, so I needed a heavy duty little clip here, but if you have a little tiny dog, obviously you don't need a clip that's quite as strong as this one. And also if you want a longer leash, just make your adjustments. The most important parts are these. So again, just make sure that you account for the hardware and then the handle. But like I said, this whole thing, actually now that we've folded it, let's see how long it is. So it is, I'd say about 65 inches long, which, you know, that gives you a good 5 feet. So anyhow, like I said, this is just a quick way to use up some of your fabric and strapping and give your pooch a little nice fancy lead. But I also wanted to show you something that I have in the works. So I know that Valentine's Day is just a month away, or a little bit over a month away, but I have been working on a pillow pattern. Now, this is just the beginning of it. I have done various configurations of this, but I actually sat down last night and wrote the pattern. So all I need to do now is finish up sewing the samples. So I have done all these little hearts with a paper piecing pattern. I started out doing it with regular quilting measurements and just regular traditional piecing, and those pieces are just so small that it's just really hard to work with, in my opinion. So I did go ahead and just do an FPP pattern for it. It's just a very simple little 2-piece heart. You put it together and then it does really nice flat ironed seams in the back. And then of course, because it's paper pieced, you have a real nice even little stretch here. But anyway, I'm going to be trying to hopefully finish this up over this weekend so that on Tuesday I can sew the pillow pattern with you on our next video. So anyhow, if you enjoyed this video, if you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment down below and let me know if you have any questions or concerns, or if you have any suggestions for me for videos in the future. And I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.